Greetings, my creepy companions! I'm Victor Crimson, your host for this edition of Tormented Tales, where we share stories that are both truly terrifying and terrifyingly true. Before we dive into tonight's twin pack of terrible tales from the online marketplace Craiglist, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button to ensure that you do not miss out on any of our future collections. And as always, if you want to submit your own true tale of terror for us to read out, send them along to the address in the description below. Tonight's stories concern Craiglist, a place to buy goods and services from other users online. As we will see from tonight's selection of horrors, however, it sometimes pays to be careful when you choose to pay online. Our first story comes from Darren in London, and exposes one of the more obvious dangers of giving your address to strangers, especially when your purchases reveal quite a bit about your hobbies and interests. Home delivery. Shopping for stuff online can be quick and convenient. It can also be dangerous, especially if the things you are buying are, shall we say, specialist items. If you aren't careful, those items can cost you a lot more than just the stated price. Sometimes they can cost you your life. The real issue is data. While most online marketplace sites like Craiglist will have a data protection policy and are very conscientious when it comes to protecting their customer details, there is an obvious chink in the armor. How can companies that facilitate these kinds of transactions mask a buyer's address when the seller needs it to send on the product? The address is right there. It's true there are some sites that will act as go-betweens, meaning that the seller sends the item to the go-between and then they ship it out. But that's just adding a middleman into the whole scenario that neither side really wants. In some cases, and especially in the ones I'm going to tell you about, the site between the merchant and the buyer is basically just a hosting platform, allowing the seller to advertise their merchandise. The online equivalent of a stall or table in a normal real-life market, if you can even remember when such things existed. Let me explain the dangers. Every incident of this kind that I've investigated so far has involved Craiglist. That isn't to say that it couldn't happen on any other platform, or that it hasn't already. It's just that all the ones I know of happen to have been linked to Craiglist in particular. If I'm honest, I probably would not have noticed anything was going on had I not been working on a completely different case and happened to notice a strange coincidence. My initial investigation was into members of far-right hate groups operating in Europe. I'm based in the south of the United Kingdom, but the operations spread across much of Northern Europe, looking into how these groups interact with each other and sometimes overlap. I was specifically charged with monitoring the activities of several individuals considered to be high up within the UK movements, with a view to possibly banning their organizations under law and recognizing them as hate groups. I also kept a close eye on their ties to similar groups on the continent. Around 2 years ago, I was charged with monitoring a particularly nasty piece of work who we can call Mike. Now, obviously, I'm not going to give his real name, but that will do for now. Mike has been in prison several times and, by my reckoning, had already gotten away with at least 3 attempted murders. He was also, like many on the far right, an avid collector of memorabilia from the Second World War, and I don't mean stuff used by the good guys. These idiots have a real passion for Nazi memorabilia. Uniforms, medals, ammunition, even cutlery and crockery used during the Third Reich. If it has the swastika on it, then these morons want it. The rarer and more authentic, the better. There are specialist websites where this kind of stuff can be purchased, and a lot of sites like Craiglist will have policies, blocks, and checks to stop things like that being sold, but it isn't always easy to prevent. Especially when these groups will have their own code words for this stuff, so that it can be sold without having to use the sort of words that would immediately flag them up and get the users banned. Things may have tightened up, but trust me when I say that a lot of this sort of war memorabilia was at one point being sold through the site, most likely without the site itself having any knowledge of it. Of course, I had knowledge of it, and I knew exactly who was ordering this stuff. I even had alerts to tell me when someone ordered this kind of stuff. Honestly, at that point, we in the security services used these kinds of purchases to show us who we might want to keep an eye on. Sometimes the buyers turned out to be academics, antiques collectors, or even museums, but often they were people who also had links to these groups, so we kept an eye on them. Unfortunately, someone else did too. When I first heard that Mike had died in a house fire, I was understandably shocked. It was a horrible tragedy and a horrific way to die. It was only a day or two later that I was told that arson was suspected and that the doors to Mike's home had been sealed up before the fire from the outside. It was a week after that when I was called to a meeting hosted by Europol, during which some harrowing details were shared. Mike's death was the 16th such incident in just under a year across Europe. In every case, the victims were members of far-right and fascist groups. In every case, they had been locked inside their homes, and the homes had been set alight with them inside, and in every case, those individuals had previously ordered specialist memorabilia from Craiglist. Basically, someone was using this stuff as a lure. The medals, uniforms, or whatever was being sold acted like bait to tempt people interested in that sort of thing out from the woodwork. Not only did it help the seller to identify people interested in buying such items, but once the sale was confirmed, it also gave them a postal address where these people lived. It gave them a target. Now I'm sure there are some people out there who will have curled their lips at the idea of a far-right murderer dying being called a tragedy. There might even be some who think this kind of vigilantism is to be applauded. Maybe that's all well and good, but what happens when someone uses the same idea to target other people? What happens when someone advertises a collection of Barbie dolls as a way of finding a place where a little girl might live? Or decide they hate people who support a particular football team and decide to torch their house because they ordered the wrong kit or showed that they supported the wrong side? Shopping for stuff online can be quick and convenient. It can also be dangerous. Take care, kiddies. There are some real freaks out there, and from the sounds of things, they are freaks with agendas, research skills, and access to the internet. A scary thought. Sometimes it isn't products, but services that Craiglist advertises, and as we'll see with our next story from Anton in Southampton, sometimes you don't even need to go through with the order for people to offer their help. Win-win. When 3 people in a row told me that maybe I should look on Craigslist, I decided, well, I should probably look on Craigslist. To be honest, up to that point, I'd always thought that it was just a site for buying and selling things, but as my friends enlightened me, it is also a place where services can be sold. In all honesty, what I really needed was a helping hand and a break. You see, in recent years, my mother's dementia had gotten a whole lot worse. Whereas before she was able to dress herself and go to the bathroom without help, those days were quickly becoming a thing of the past. Whilst I would have loved to take more time off from my job to be able to look after her full time, I also needed to pay the rent, and the sort of carers' allowances that were available would not be enough to keep a roof over our heads. So I did what I could and worked from home about 90% of the time, but it was still hard. Unfortunately, working from home means that you still do have to actually work. And whilst it was good that I was in the house to prevent my mum doing anything silly, there were times when I simply had to block off time to get work done, and was forced to leave her alone on the sofa or in the other room whilst I got on with tackling my assigned tasks. This obviously made me feel incredibly guilty and sapped up an awful lot of my time. It seemed like every moment of my day was taken up either by working, as I constantly tried to play catch-up with the things I was behind on, or with taking care of my mum, preparing meals, bathing her, taking care of her medications, and 1,001 other small jobs that just piled and piled on top of each other. Then there was my mum's wandering. When I took my eye off her, she would try to go out. I installed locks and even child safety gates, but somehow, on 2 occasions, she got around these and let herself out in the middle of the night. She was found wandering in her nightie up the motorway, cold, confused, and soaking wet. It was then that I decided for certain I needed help. When I told people this, Craiglist was the first thing they said. There are people, they said, who will come around and for a small fee spend some time with your mum whilst you get on with your work. Some folks will do cleaning or other household chores to lift the load a bit, and still others are actual qualified carers who can help out a lot more than you would ever imagine. So I decided to have a look. My search didn't get very far. In my first set of results, I found one advertisement that made my skin crawl. It was for a person. It wasn't clear if it was a man or a woman, called Win-Win. The image was of a figure in what looked like hospital scrubs, but the face was nothing but a smile. Now, I don't mean that metaphorically. What I mean is that someone had digitally manipulated the face so that whilst there was a halo of lank black hair and an awful gaping smile, there were no other facial features at all. No eyes, no nose, no ears, nothing except a mouth that stretched further than it should, filled with horrible blackened teeth. The rest of the skin on the face was as beige and featureless as the surface of a hard-boiled egg. Next to the image was information about this person, who said they would come to the home to help with relatives. Everything was written in the third person and in a strange, broken English. Win-win come you live. Win-win help you. Help you. Help with problem. Win-win come to help you. Win-win take all problems away. The image was creepy. I assumed it had been posted as a joke. Probably college boys putting stuff up as a prank. But the image of that thin, wiry figure, smiling without a face, haunted me. I disliked it so much that I stopped searching, shut off the laptop, and got back to whatever else I had planned for that day. I didn't think about Craiglist for the rest of that day until I was putting Mum to bed and she suddenly asked me, "When is Win-Win coming to help?" I was stunned. I hadn't messaged the person. I hadn't made an order or even spoken about my search with Mum. So how did she know that name? I hadn't mentioned it. When I asked her, she just smiled and called me silly, then started asking about something else entirely. I made my way downstairs, opened up my laptop, and looked for the advertisement again, wondering if Mum could have seen it at some point, but it wasn't there. Whoever had posted the advert had removed it. But the next week, the final week of my mother's life, she was obsessed. "When is Win-Win coming?" she asked, as if this Win-Win was someone she had known all her life and was expecting a visit from. When I asked who Win-Win was and how she knew the name, she would just grin at me. "You know Win-Win, silly," she'd say, then force her cheeks up, showing her teeth and pulling at the edges of her mouth with her fingers to stretch the lips into a horrible, grotesque version of a smile. Then, with her lips still stretched, she tried to speak in this horrible, wet and curdling way. "She's coming to help. Win-Win coming to help. Take the problem away." On the 29th of December last year, my mum somehow got out of the house. She somehow got around the child safety gates, unlocked the doors, and wandered out into the street, again in just her nightdress. I never saw her again. Officially, she is listed as a missing person. At first, the police said they would find her in a few days, and that tragically, she had probably wandered off and died of exposure. The investigation became more serious, however, when CCTV footage showed her traipsing up the side of the road with another figure, only around 3.5 feet tall, holding her hand and leading her to wherever it was that she went. The figure, which could only be seen from the back, was the size and dimensions of a child and appeared to be wearing medical scrubs. The police have appealed for information and are looking to identify that individual. I have a feeling I already know their name. That's all for this edition, kiddies. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time for more examples of truth being both stranger and more terrifying than fiction. Until then, I've been Victor Crimson, and this is Tormented Tales. Sweet dreams.